Okay, so for our lectures on Chapter 7 and 8, this video will be on Chapter 7, Special Types of Losses. Some of these statistics are a little older. Perhaps one of the most difficult losses is suicide of a loved one. In this culture, there are taboo aspects connected with that. In other cultures, it is not considered taboo. It is, in Asian culture, it is often considered an honorable way to die. Whatever our belief system, suicide is most often not a wish to die, though even somebody says, I wish I was dead, but it is often a wish to escape emotional or physical pain. And they just don't know any other way to do that. They've tried everything else, and that's very unfortunate. Seeing suicide in that light should give others in our society a little more empathy. It is just, if not more, difficult for a survivor who has lost a loved one to suicide. I remember losing one of my friends when I was a teenager to suicide. It was very difficult. My brother's friend. More difficult for him, but for my brother, who lost a close friend. But one of the complications happens to be religion in our culture. Other religions accept suicide in a loving and compassionate way. Christian religion often does, but sometimes it does not. It could be seen as a sin, as an unforgivable sin, and unfortunately this is a very negative concept. If we're just to talk a little bit about the Christian religion, if somebody were to ask me specifically what my thoughts were on it, this is just my personal thought, I would simply say that I believed God was more compassionate and loving than we could even grasp, and that forgiveness and love is available to everyone. So I try to keep it very simple. That question has been brought to me many, many times. But each religion has its own concept of this, and that is what often adds to complicated grieving, is one's religious beliefs, but also other people's beliefs about the subject or discomfort with this subject. So even though death is rarely discussed, suicide is even more difficult for individuals in our culture to discuss, and as such, for other people to provide empathy or comfort for those suffering from a loss like this. You can look at some of these mortality rates. All suicides in 2002, number of deaths, almost 32,000. Deaths per 100,000, 11, so 11 people in every 100,000. Compared to firearm or other types of suicides, the number of deaths with firearms is around 17,000, 5.9 number of deaths through suffocation, usually hanging, 6,400 poisoning, overdoses. Number of deaths, 5,400, and then other. But those are the most common. Not always, but most often, firearm suicides are by males. They're usually more permanent. By that I mean, if a suicide is attempted using a firearm, it usually results in death. Suffocation, also very lethal, but not as lethal as suicides. Poisoning, a lot of times people may act out and attempt suicide by taking a lot of aspirin or acetaminophen, Tylenol, based medication. And even though they change their mind and say, I'm going to go get my stomach pumped or something like that, one of the results is often liver damage, and that could result in long-term suffering and eventual death. Females usually attempt with overdoses. That's just statistics in our own culture. The means, I'm just giving you these statistics, but ages, people are often more impulsive at younger ages, especially during teen years, so between 12 and 30, there's a high incidence of suicide. And then the next highest incidence is over 65. There's a lot of stressors that go into play, including body chemistry, especially for the younger individuals. Shame is often a feeling that clients face, regret, wishing or guilt, wishing that they could have prevented this or known in some way. Children are especially vulnerable to self-blame and guilt through what's called magical thinking, but any person could experience this. Magical thinking is if somebody believes that, I just want to kill myself, and they've just argued, or if a child in their mind, or even an adult, kind of says, I wish you were dead, but doesn't really mean it. They may think that those words have power, more power than just hurting somebody's feelings, that it would actually resulted in somebody's death, and that's magical thinking. So people experience the projection of guilt is blame. Anger is often expressed through questions of why. Individuals have a sense of rejection leading to low self-esteem, anxiety, depression. Fear and anxiety result in a sense of doom or self-destructive impulses. Many believe that suicide will later be their own fate, especially if a parent commits suicide. It's important to do kind of a reality test with guilt and blame, helping to correct denial and distortions, exploring fantasies of the future, working with anger. And often there is anger that the individual who died abandoned the client in some way. So there's a lot of anger, a secondary emotion resulting from a feeling of abandonment. Another type of death is sudden death. Could be traumatic, but definitely not anticipated. There's an unreality with a loss, also guilty feelings, a need to blame, a sense of helplessness. Often there's considerable involvement in medical or legal authorities. So I remember my mother had a living will. I knew what her wishes were, but because she was unconscious near the end of her life, I had to make the final decision to disconnect her from life support. Fortunately, I knew what her wishes were, but it was not easy. If there are legal aspects surrounding a death or medical aspects, the grieving process cannot move forward until the legal aspects or medical aspects have been resolved. And that could take quite some time. As long as they are a shadow, then the grieving process is never really fulfilled. There's a sense of unfinished business. I need to understand. Interventions, crisis interventions, actual use of the word dead or death. I would not use platitudes or cliches. I would screen for post-traumatic stress disorder. So, for instance, many of my clients have come home and found a loved one deceased, either through suicide or heart attack. And this is especially, it's difficult for any age individual, but especially for children. They feel as though, oh, if I had only known CPR or something like that, but in most cases it is beyond the child's control. But once again, if only questions, why questions, that sense of helplessness. Some of the most difficult types of grief and losses are sudden infant death syndromes, loss of a child for any reason, miscarriages or stillbirths as well. Autopsy permission is important legally and personally, and that would be because it's the last chance to learn all the facts about the illness or the cause of death. It's easier to accept death when we know that it was inevitable. For instance, if it was a heart condition or something like that, the knowledge of the exact cause of death is often necessary for settling insurance or legal matters, which seems heartless, but it's part of our society. 1/5 to 1/3 of pregnancies end in miscarriages. Members of my family have experienced this and gone through grieving. The length of the pregnancy prior to the miscarriage may impact the intensity of grief. It doesn't have to. Grief can be severe after the first month. After just realizing somebody is pregnant, the grief can be just as intense. It's important to address the woman's health after having a miscarriage, whether they are experiencing depression. Men and women grieve this loss, but it could be expressed in different ways. There's not a lot of established rituals in our society for miscarriages, and places of work are not often sympathetic, which is not something good about our society. A lot of time, death has anticipatory aspect of it. We understand that somebody is going to die. Another new aspect of death in our society is AIDS and HIV. And there's often a stigma involved in that. I'm going to close this segment of our lecture on this chapter, and we'll pick up again with the next chapter.